and welcome to the Wednesday Night War Preview Podcast. I'm Adam Wilborn from What Culture, joined by the Dadley Boys of What Culture, paid NXT shield Michael Hamflett and paid AEW shield Michael Sidgwick to preview tonight's episodes of NXT and AEW Dynamite. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts, where we not only review the Wednesday Night War, but also Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-views. We have interviews, roundtable discussions, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on Wrestle Culture. As I said, though, joined by Hamflett and Sidgwick to talk about NXT and Dynamite. And, of course, we are live on YouTube now. Any questions you'd like these two wonderful men to answer, please stick them in the comments section. But before we deal with the ongoing situation and the war between NXT and AEW, we should deal with the news story coming out today from Fightful regarding Backstage Unrest in WWE. This is all resulting from WWE's changing of plans, live shows, tape shows, all the stuff around with the ongoing current medical situation, or whatever you want to call it. But Fightful says there is a lot of unhappiness and unrest within the WWE locker room over the mandate to return to live programming and then the subsequent switches. The first SmackDown was about an hour behind live broadcast, but the following Monday went live. Wrestlers and staff we've spoken to felt like a price tag was put on them as a result. Michael Hamflett, no real surprise that there is more backstage WWE unrest. It's a case of WWE making a rod for their own back here, isn't it?
Yeah, good. Nice to hear the story. Nice to hear that talents remember that they're human beings being put at risk in a time where human beings are asked to do one thing very specifically, and WWE are asking them to do the total opposite. A hectic work schedule is bad enough when life is completely normal. Life has never been more abnormal, and these do a job that puts them in direct risk of the reasons why things are abnormal at the moment. This plays into everything we've all ever thought about wrestling continue to run and wrestling continue to be essential, and a bunch of petty paymasters being satisfied doesn't account for all the risks that these wrestlers continue to work underneath. I'm glad they're speaking up. I doubt it'll do anything ultimately. There is no union. There is very little power. There is very little voice. But all the same, it makes me respect these incredible athletes even more than I already do.
Yeah, for me, it's just, if you're going to inflict the schedule on the performers, and don't give me the whole, they're free to not work as they see fit. There will be an internal pressure, I can guarantee it, on these performers, whether it's explicitly made or not. There will be a pressure felt, and I think rather than actively condition this sense of pressure, they will do the square sum of bot all to dissuade people from feeling under pressure. If you're going to make them do something like this, it's abhorrent in this current circumstance to make them work. If you are going to make them fly from state to state, thus potentially allowing them, or enabling them, to infect all others. So not only do they feel incredibly unsafe in themselves, they feel guilty about potentially infecting other people if they are asymptomatic carriers. If you are going to inflict and impose all of this on the talent and the crew, for the love of Christ, get your crap together, recognize the incredible sacrifices they are either willing to or under pressure to make, and just get a decent schedule going. It's the absolute least you can do, is stick to a consistent schedule. Don't go live, then tape, and then tape, then live, or tape an hour behind, and then bang on the minute. Make this horrifically stressful situation less stressful, if remotely possible. And it is remotely possible. Just don't be a demented old libertarian man. It's quite simple.
We will, of course, keep you updated on any developments with this situation. Fascinating to see where we go from here. I do believe NXT live tonight, but then SmackDown. Am I right in thinking that's going to be taped, Hamflett?
Yeah, that's what we know currently, but they're making this up as they go along every week, aren't they? So that could change as and when a regulation they have to jump, a hoop they have to jump through.
Well, yes, it's like you say, it's down to the fact that the companies have said that they aren't requiring live shows, but still, half the time, the reason why this happens is because Vince McMahon wakes up on the wrong side of bed. So who knows what's going to happen there. Let's move on and talk about this Wednesday Night War then. Mr. Phoenix in the comments section, thank you so much for your donation. Asked a question that can sort of lead into my first question to you, Michael Sidgwick. Mr. Phoenix writes, NXT wins thrice on the bounce, ? Yes. Sidge, how can how can AEW even beat NXT again?
Before I blocked him on Twitter, this Mr. Phoenix fella with his horrendous first prefix was very. It's like, he's like he's from Shelbyville, like bragging about the NXT victories that are so few and far between, as if he has anything remotely to do with them. Thanks for your donation, Mr. Phoenix. I would just like to point that out. But they could potentially win 3 times in a row. I think AEW's counter to that not happening, if I'm being honest, and Mr. Phoenix will enjoy me admitting this, is quite pathetic or desperate. We will get to that. I think NXT will win it narrowly once again, just because they've got. It's like the very last set of WWE core fans who will simply watch anything. Not that NXT is not better than Raw and SmackDown under normal circumstances. You understand it's just more intimate, less big time for whatever reason. Inexplicably, it's less popular. AEW fans, going back to the presidential debates and how the numbers were reflected when they were going on at the same time, going back to I think it was Thanksgiving. That was on the Wednesday night, or it fell on the Wednesday night, or the eve, or whatever. I'm not American, I don't care. Basically, whenever something's going on that is bigger than wrestling, it will invariably impact on the AEW ratings, and I think they will continue to have problems that don't reflect the qualities of these compromised shows, because AEW fans are just better, woker, more politically engaged people than the WWE boomers. And if you're one of the dolts in the comments section who can't tell I'm taking the piss, stop being so weirdly hyper literal.
Before we get to the boomers' thoughts, Matt Range has been in the comments section saying, "Afternoon, guys. Hey, Sidgwick. Hey, Hamflet. My wife asked me why I was excited this morning. I said, it's Wednesday, Exalted One. You know what that means." Before we get to AEW and
thoughts and prayers to Mrs. Reigns. Thoughts and prayers.
Before we get to the rather drastic announcement they have made ahead of tonight's show, let's talk about NXT, Hamflet. A really, really good show on the cards, in my opinion. We've got 3 NXT Cruiserweight Championship tournament matches, one of which I really want to get into, involving Drake Maverick. But the headline, I suppose, Finn Balor versus Velveteen Dream tonight, Hamflet.
Yeah, usual disclaimer, so I don't sound like a total misery, is that I'll try to analyse these, imagining that there was a crowd in there rather than the reality of what we're going to get. Finn Balor versus Velveteen Dream is excellent booking. Really, really strong booking. Velveteen Dream works his way into contention, though not a shot. Finn Balor, with a kind of shot that he deserves, challenges that contention, and thus we have a match that is sort of a dream match, no pun intended, because it feels like a clash of ages for NXT. It feels like it should be of a high quality, because you would expect Balor to be able to elevate some of the shonky work that we've seen from Dream since he's come back. So all signs point towards this have been like brewing while they've been trying to like concoct this Adam Cole Velveteen Dream storyline, only to be slightly ruined by the atmosphere it's going to take place in. Lots of pressure on Dream to do well in spite of the crowd undermining the match, and I hope this goes well for him. Because I sense if it doesn't, people will lose faith in this push entirely.
Yeah, so do you see this as make or break for Velveteen Dream?
As I've said continually, and I know I'm a broken record, I can't perceive anything as make or break in this current context, because the second that all of this comes back, you're going to see a wave of euphoria that is going to sweep up everybody, regardless of how poorly they perform in this empty arena context, and everyone's going to get a hero's welcome. Like, I'm firmly believing of that. All that said, Velveteen Dream's gone full anti-Rappaport. He never used to suck, but he kind of sucks now. He's just, even before his sort of very theatrical crowd interaction bit was totally compromised by the fact that there is no crowd, his performance level had dipped like profoundly. Like, understandably, he's coming back from an injury, so it's hard to gauge whether he just needed to get back properly into the run of things. But it wasn't helped by Twitter crack. I would not, if I was a fan of NXT, a heartfelt fan of NXT, raise my expectations to get this version of Finn Balor versus the 2018 version of Velveteen Dream, because I just don't think it's going to be anywhere near that good.
I want to talk all about the NXT Cruiserweight Championship matches that are taking place tonight, because the first one last week was really enjoyable. But before we do that, Hamfler, Drake Maverick versus Jake Atlas is arguably the most intriguing out of them all, despite the fact we've got El Hijo del Fantasma making his debut, because there's been speculation, and I'm a man who has a history of calling things works. I've steered very clear of this one, but there's been a speculation online. Obviously, Drake Maverick was one of the names in those awful WWE releases. God, that was a week ago, wasn't it? And yet he's still obviously in this tournament, and he's described it as a last chance, which often people seem to take as a nod to perhaps a heel turn, some sort of desperation working in this tournament. How do you see it?
Oh, I'm a little bit uneasy talking about this one as well. I feel like we all probably want to tiptoe around it, because what it does is it risks trivializing what was a really awful day for a lot of people, releases and furloughing and the mental health implications of those that remained. You kind of risk throwing that away if you turn that situation into a work that could benefit yourself. However, with it being pro wrestling, I don't mind getting worked, and I don't mind the intrigue of not knowing. Drake Maverick, kind of, whether he intended to or not, and it's pro wrestling, so one would suggest that he probably did intend to do this, made that entire situation mostly about him. The mental image most of us will probably have of Black Wednesday will be of him in tears with his head in his hands, pushing his hair behind, whatever it was, on that Twitter video, which is as traditional pro wrestling work as it gets, even in awful circumstances. So not knowing is the fun, if you can call it that here. I think he's released, because I just don't think that it would be included in a shoot set of news that also affected the careers of others if it wasn't the case. Whether or not a change has taken place and we're not aware of that bit of it, that could be the case. I don't know. But I certainly think first time around he was released.
Yeah, I think Sid, before I get your thoughts on this, Eric Vasquez in the comments may have hit the nail on the head with this one, asking whether WWE's plans could have changed with Maverick on the heels of that video and then subsequent, obviously, fan support he received correctly. Could they re-sign him and push him to win the Cruiserweight Championship? That would be the most WWE thing ever, to put someone like that through the ringer, only to go, oh, people did actually like you. I like you in the whole thing.
It would be very WWE, but remind me, was Drake Maverick announced, obviously, for this tournament before he was released?
Yes.
That is the case. I'm not touching this at all. I'm not touching this at all. I saw the video. I'm not touching this at all. I would rather write a stand Jerry Lawler being a nonce than touch this situation. You ever noticed how he always says puppies and not dogs?
Let's move on and talk about some of the other matches set to take place in the NXT Cruiserweight Championship tournament tonight, Hamfler. El Hijo del Fantasma taking on Jack Gallagher, and Kushida versus Tony Nese and his tiny knees. How do you see this one? These two going, in fact, Hamfler.
Hopefully bangers. Last week was a sort of modest success for the Cruiserweight division again. Jack Gallagher, for those that haven't seen him, will look completely different to the last time that he did, because he rocked up on 205 Live a little while ago, completely inked up with an entirely different look, different ethos to the way he worked. So that could be quite interesting. El Fantasma might be the guy that's throwing people in the back of the truck. So that could be something to talk about. Like I know I said when we started analyzing these that like I was going to try and go into this imagining crowds are going to be there. I can't do this, not least with these matches. Cruiserweight matches that are engineered for pops need pops, so they'll be up against it, and I hope they overachieve in spite of the circumstances.
You would sense, Sige, that this is going to go to Maverick, Kushida, and El Hijo del Fantasma tonight.
It's so weird talking and trying to earnestly preview a match involving Drake Maverick, given that he no longer works there. It's the weirdest goddamn thing. I'm not going to be able to get immersed in that match whatsoever, no matter how good it is. I just find it almost deplorable. It's so beyond bizarre. Not only are they're doing two horrendous things at once, they are endangering his life while he doesn't have a livelihood. It's just, I find it astonishing. It is so wrong. That's going to paint a bad cloud over that match for me. What are the other two ones? Refresh my memory.
Kushida versus Tony Nese and El Hijo del Fantasma versus Jack Gallagher.
El Hijo del Fantasma versus Jack Gallagher should be a very interesting match, but again, it's like the whole Austin Theory thing. It's so weird judging a performer who's making his company debut in this environment. It's just the most odd thing. I always feel a bit sad that they're not getting sort of that initial pop if they're a really big name, a la like Brody Lee, or B, they don't get that instant generosity factor of, right, let's see what you can do. I've never seen you before. I'm interested. You haven't been stigmatized or poorly booked or normalized. So that feels a bit odd. Looking forward to Kushida versus Tony Nese. Tony Nese is very underrated, and Kushida still has it in him to be the best pro wrestler in the world, like he was just 2 or 3 years ago. But I don't care about him.
WCPW World Champion, of course.
Jesus Christ. Bingo.
Very quickly before we talk about AEW Hamlet, there's Tegan Nox versus Tegan Nox and Shotzi Blackheart versus Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez, which we will be discussing more on tomorrow's review podcast. But I quickly want to know your thoughts, Hamlet, on what is next for the man who is now Karrion Kross, not Killer Kross, and Tommaso Ciampa. That was what we saw at the end of last week's episode.
Yeah, probably very little. It would behoove them to stagger all of this as much as they possibly can. We go on about this all the time now, but the lack of a reaction to a debutant can do significant damage to them. Lance Archer in AEW is feeling like the exception that proves the rule at the moment with that. And I do worry for Karrion Kross if he was to be brought out to cut one of them standard mid-ring promos to explain his motivations and explain why he's currently arrived on the scene. We get it. We get the gist. He's gone for Tommaso Ciampa straight away because he sees a top guy in a weakened state. That's enough. We don't need to be patronized with more story than we need. I don't want to see more of Karrion Kross than I need to in that empty setting. It undermines him completely. Less will be so much more with this character.
So to sort of summarize your point there, you're saying keep calm and carry on.
Good God.
That's going to be used more in the future. Let's transition over to AEW then, Michael Sidgwick. I shouldn't be laughing here because we could see the end of a
Used to be the best wrestler of the week, this one. Used to be the best wrestler of the week.
We could see the end of a legendary wrestling career tonight. Dustin Rhodes, if he fails to defeat Kip Sabian in the TNT Championship tournament, has announced he will retire. Could we see that happening tonight, Sidge?
No.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Just to deflect any inbound criticism from Michael Hamflet, because I'm just going to give him no leg to stand on here. I kind of admire the graft of the stipulation because it's so brazenly corny that kind of reminds me of something Jeff Jarrett might do.
Don't even dare! Don't you dare!
You can't even say anything now. Basically, what's happened here is that. Do you think Jeff Jarrett's above it?
Above what? Above everything. He's the king of the mountain.
The thing is, this is so desperate and so corny that, in a sense, I kind of admire it. At the same time, I don't like this at all. There's no chance he's getting beat. This is a thoroughly transparent means of trying to convince me otherwise. And what I didn't like in particular was, obviously, you're going to have to sell something like this, like with incredible melodrama, to put it over, but like they did it with like a socially distanced voicemail message with Cody on the road too. Just feels like, right, we've lost the ratings 2 weeks in a row. What can we possibly tack on to this week's episode that feels like it's going to win a rating? And I just feel like that's the one thing I was hammering NXT for in the early months, and because I'm a fair and unbiased analyst, I can't in good conscience let AEW get away with this. I really didn't like Tony Khan piping up on Twitter going, "Oh no, Dustin, don't. No, man, don't be so rash. Think about this all the way through." It feels like I'm getting worked by a bunch of cornies, and they, goddammit, should be clever enough to realize how obvious it looks. Like, don't insult my intelligence. That's the one thing that drives me away from WWE. Please don't do it here.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there. I saw this and thought it was like an overarching, sort of Ric Flair-esque, the next time I lose, I'm gone sort of thing. And then subsequently came to realize, especially obviously after watching the Road 2 clip that AEW put up, it's just this match. So it's like me saying, do you know what? If Lance Archer or Wardlow lose in the next couple of weeks, I'm done with wrestling. They've already pre-taped it all, and they clearly are going to win all of their matches.
Let me leap to the defense of Sidgwick's brand for just a second. A few weeks ago, I think Sidgwick quite accurately assessed something that happened in AEW, which was that Lance Archer's debut was pulled a week because at the last minute they came up with a better idea of bringing Jake Robertson into the act. I tend to agree with that being how that played out because it was ill-advised to advertise him beforehand. This all happening so late and so rushed and so haphazardly could imply that there is a big idea that will spew forth from this. something that like we wouldn't yet predict because it will be out of nowhere, or it will be something that will be a genuine talking point. What they do have in Dustin Rhodes is a character that people care enough about. Probably not enough to buy into a 24-hour retirement stipulation, but might buy into an angle that comes off the back of this. So the review might be incredibly different in tone to the preview.
Indeed. And I sincerely hope he doesn't, because he'd face Lance Archer in the next round if he qualifies, correct, Sidge?
Yes, he does.
Yeah, don't make that promise about retiring if you lose that match, because he's going to murder him. Right, let's talk about some of the other matches, including another match in the TNT Championship tournament. My God, this is mouth-watering on paper, Sidge. Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for clear reasons, it's not going to approach what they did at Revolution, even though it'll be a different match. I expect it to just actually start at the bell. And Darby Allin proved himself perfectly in that environment when he was scaling up the big pole and did his coffin drop from about 10 feet high. I've got full confidence that he'd be able to do a great match. And he tweeted something along the lines of, "This is going to be insane," just a few days ago. But on the back of Tony Khan tweeting last week, "You're going to get the greatest empty arena match of all time. You can't scarcely believe how great this is going to be." And it was a monumental dud. I've lost a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of faith in that process. And for me, it's such a huge deal when you lose that kind of respect and faith in the process, that when someone then hypes something up, you instantly just are a little bit more reluctant to believe it. So I think it's a very, very precarious Carney game that they are playing at the moment. Obviously, they're scared about the ratings, as well they should be, because they're a new concern. I want to be able to trust Darby Allin as a babyface. I want to believe that this is going to be the best possible match they could have crafted under the circumstances.
Don't forget, if you've got any questions that you want these two to answer, make sure you stick them in the comment section. We'll deal with them in just a few minutes. But Hamza, I want to know your thoughts on this, because watching that Road 2 just reminded me how much I adore Sammy Guevara. But unfortunately, you get the sense, and probably for the best in storyline of this TNT Championship tournament, that Darby's probably going to get the win here.
Yeah, I would expect Darby Allin to win. I paid for this match once and I'd happily pay for it again. It was that good, and I feel like it's a bonus, if nothing else, that we're getting it on free television with stakes as well. These two are the boys. These two are everything that the reason for AEW to exist. Here they are, Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara 12 months ago. So few of us who can only keep up with mainstream wrestling would have known of them, and now we get to see them performing on network television. It's class. All in theory. This match and the quality of it, I feel, will be determined by the atmosphere on Dynamite in general. We've seen on Dynamite in the last few weeks, and I think it's safe to say we can all agree it does handle this empty arena setting marginally better than WWE, but a show that just doesn't feel that relevant and that topical and that interesting has a knock-on effect on everything else happening on it. And I think these will be affected by that. If this doesn't feel like a particularly dynamic episode within the first 15 minutes, of course, they could open it and make it feel dynamic, then I think this match will suffer under the weight of that. The more I'm saying this, the more I feel like this episode of Dynamite has the best chance if these two do go on first, because over is over, and you've just got to, for Darby Allin especially, somehow translate that without the noise of a crowd through the screen. He's a guy that I believe might be able to do that.
We've also got Kenny Omega, Brody Lee, and Wardlow in action. No word on their opponents just yet, though. So instead, we have to talk about, oh, bloody hell, Sidge, see if you can drag something out of this. Orange Cassidy versus Jimmy Bloody Havoc.
Oh, God, I can't wait for this. This is going to be one of the moments on the show that, because Orange Cassidy in the comment section will hate this, couldn't give a toss, it's so transcendently wonderful to watch that I'm just going to allow myself to escape this horrendous situation and just bask in his glory, because I love him so much. A quick note on those squash matches. I know you said to skip past them. I suspect, given their interaction either last week or a few weeks ago, that it's going to be Brody Lee versus Marco Stunt. Huge, huge test for Brody Lee, because he has to make that match halfway as interesting as Lance Archer did. I demand to see the suicide dive through the rope. I demand to see Marco Stunt splattered against a barricade. I think that's the perfect way to do it, like Elimination Chamber 2014 style. Boom, but it's Marco Stunt. But yeah, Jimmy Havoc versus Orange Cassidy. It's going to be interesting, because Orange Cassidy, a lot of the charm, the gimmick is that he can manipulate the crowd into doing the work for him. So when he lightly grazes someone's calf, they have to like melt down essentially, as if it's like a massive strong style forearm to the face. It's like a joke that the crowd has to be in on. There's no crowd. I'm thinking someone like Austin Gunn, who's been ringside throughout all of this, is going to have to ham it up spectacularly if this is going to work. And it's kind of like he's an unsung hero doing something absolutely not heroic at all by being irresponsible with the social distancing. But he's created so much ambience by being incredibly energetic across these marathon tapings that I think he's going to have to really work beyond himself to get this over, because it's just going to be quite weird otherwise.
I got a spot for you. Cassidy puts the hands in his pockets as the big T's, and then Jimmy Havoc staples the pockets to his hands, and the wrestlers in the stands go, "Oh!" and make loads of noise for it to sell. Obviously, he's not really got him stapled. And then Cassidy has the hands in pocket spots, with us thinking that they're stapled rather than it's by choice. And then when he finally like fights to rip them off, it's like a bit of a hero's moment for him. Something
Fantastic.
Be creative with Havoc's weapon stuff.
I really like that. Right, before we move to the questions we've got in the comments, the obvious question we ask every single week: who's going to win the Wednesday Night War? Michael Hamflett, why don't you start us off as Cedric takes notes?
Who I'm not a huge fan of, but always has his finger on the pulse, called this a pattern last week. Although the numbers, the disparity is so small that you could call it a draw. He's done this sort of crack long enough that it suggests to me that he maybe knows something about how these things are going to go. I think Cedric's observation about the NXT loyalists is probably too as well. NXT narrowly, it feels like it's going to go that way again, but something very similar to what we've seen. Differences of $5,000, 5,000, negligible numbers separating the two shows at the moment. If anything, like AEW will close that gap because of the Dustin Rhodes tease.
I'm going to agree with you there. Let's go. I don't really know. 625 to 620 to NXT.
It's hard to reach far beyond that. Sorry, I didn't give numbers, did I? I'll go 640 to like 635 NXT AEW.
Sid?
So hold on. NXT's beaten AEW for you, Hamflett. 635.
Aye, yeah.
Hamflett, what's yours? What's yours?
Sorry, yeah, I went play 620 in NXT's favour as well. I think they're just going to edge it based on the reasons that you gave, actually, Sid.
Just to recap from last week, we all said that AEW were going to win. So we failed miserably on that. I'm going to believe in the old-fashioned carny spirit, because if you can't believe in that, what can you believe in anymore? I think 670 is going to play 650, and then I'm going to be a hypocrite when I reveal it to be a win, when in fact I said a similar score last week was a margin error draw.
Bleary Athlete 40 in the comments. Question for you, Sid. Should AEW have stopped taping after the debuts of Hardy and Brody and left it on a cliffhanger until crowds return?
Yes, I believe so. They should be, even if it's for cynical PR, they really should have put themselves over as the babyface promotion here. But I think ROH should be more of a babyface promotion than AEW. I don't think that's going to sort of mutate into buzz or anything, but I think it would have been socially more responsible. I think the cliffhanger element is something we've never, ever seen ever in professional wrestling for a prolonged amount of time. And I think that could be incredibly interesting. But ultimately, as much as we want to believe this is a big passion project to restore the wonder of pro wrestling back into the hands of the wrestlers and the wrestling fans, it's called hard capitalism, and they are not exempt from it. And I think their hand was sort of turned.
Undead FBU in the comments asks, are we getting the Dadley Boys t-shirts? We'll work on that. And Matt Rains asks, I'll let you take this, Hamflett, considering your relationship with Matt. Of AEW and NXT, who do you gents miss the most right now? So I assume he means the people, obviously, who aren't on our screens.
Ooh. AEW, Hangman Page. I mean, who else? Like, he's one of the best AEW wrestlers, even when he's sat at home, knocking together those brilliant videos or making fantastic statements on Twitter. So, of course, I miss, because all that tag team match at Revolution feels so fresh still, and that relied so much on incredible crowd reactions. So it was everything that we missed about pro wrestling. In NXT, it's less a wrestler, and it's more how powerful that atmosphere is. I miss takeover. I miss the feeling of an excitement of an upcoming takeover. I miss what the matches that we've already seen from Takeover Tampa lost by taking place outside of a takeover. So it's more, which I suppose plays the Sidgwick argument that show carries more power than the brand itself sometimes. I miss the possibility of that takeover. Everything that's happening now feels like the final destination will be in the empty performance center instead of a molten crowd receiving wrestling the way it's meant to be received.
Sid, who do you miss?
I miss the Cruiserweights. Obviously, Pete Dunne can't make it over to the US. I do miss the Cruiserweights a great deal because they were such a fun act. They were everything, like they kind of restored in a very small way the old soul of NXT for me, in addition to retaining the incredible level of technical work that brand has to offer. So they were the perfect NXT act for 2020 for me. So it's a real shame that they're not there, and B, they're not there in the context of having crowds. And yeah, it has to be Hangman Page. It has to be Hangman Page because he was just the ultimate babyface in pro wrestling. I described him on Twitter as a drill Stan Hansen hybrid for how great his work was and his like really nice, like, phrased sense of humor. So I miss Hangman Page. I miss him a lot.
Very quickly, final couple of questions. One here from Daniel Brotherton for you, Sidge. Here's his predictions. See what you think of this. Cody wins the semi against Sammy, and Lance has to beat his brother in his semi to get to Cody in the final. What do you think?
No, I think that's the perfect way to book it. I think the fact that Lance Archer is going up against Dustin Rhodes is a really inspired spot of booking because Lance Archer can do something despicable to Dustin Rhodes to try and get the ire of Cody. I just think that's the most deft and organic way of going about it. So yeah, I agree completely with Mr. Brotherton.
Final question today I'm going to give to Benjamin Mason for you, Hamflet, asking, when this is all over, do you think the WWE releases will go to AEW and create a stable full of releases? And who would you pick to be in there? Benjamin picks Rusev, Heath, Ryder, and Hawkins.
I think there's places for certain wrestlers on the release list for AEW, as there is for New Japan and all companies, because all those wrestlers are worthy of working in various destinations. I think the stable is probably the worst way to do it from an optics point of view, because it would reflect more how TNA used to bring in WWE guys, which was with this idea that they've come from somewhere else. So it constantly has to be about the somewhere else rather than the place they're at now. If you look at AEW's record with WWE talent so far, for better and worse, they've all been given fresh starts. It might not have worked particularly well with Hager in ring, but it was a brand new character in week 1 and 2, and he felt reborn. All that we knew about Jack Swagger was that he was a stupid idea from bad creative, to quote Chris Jericho. So that's the pattern with which AEW should follow, not a series of invaders, not a series of New World Order light type run-ins, because why bother reminding fans out the gate that these used to be inferior somewhere else?
Indeed, and it's not just the comparisons that are going to be made to their WWE characters, but as Hamflet alludes to there, the New World Order light, if you've got a new stable of invading guys from another promotion, whether or not they're acting on behalf of that other promotion, it's going to draw an immediate comparison to the NWO. And Jesus Christ, I just don't think, with all respect to the personnel involved in the pitch, that they're not on the level of star power that the NWO were initially.
Very quickly, before we wrap up, Sidge, what did you make of the Being the Elite 200 episode?
I thought it was absolutely spectacular, right? Because it wasn't meant to be a great work rate match, except it was, because I don't think they're capable of doing anything else. There was lots of silly comedy and fun spots like the Canadian Destroyer into the pool. And this is genuine, there were certain points of that match where I thought, this is actually how show-off brothers would have a fight. Like when they were 5 years old, there was one point where Matt, I can't remember which one, but they were about to do the Macho Man spot where he vaults over the top rope and like smacks their head off it. And Nick was like, I'm going to do the Macho Man thing. I'm going to do the Macho Man thing. And he did it. And that's almost how I spoke when I was 6. When you're on the football, when you're playing football, you go, I'm going to be Shearer, I'm going to be Shearer. I'm doing the Macho Man thing. I'm doing the Macho Man thing. It was genuinely how they would have had a fight when they were 5 years old. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, well worth going to check out. Right, this has been the Wednesday Night War preview. Do let us know your thoughts, as I said, in the comments section, and make sure you join us tomorrow. We will be doing the podcast reviewing the Wednesday Night War. That'll be out. All you have to do to find that is search for What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Let us know your thoughts on the Wednesday Night War at What Culture WWE on Twitter, where you can follow all three of us. You can follow paid NXT show Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow paid AEW shill Michael Sidgwick at.
Thanks for your donation, Mr. Phoenix, at M. Sidgwick.
Follow me at Adam Wilborn. Thank you all for your donations and your contributions today. Join us again tomorrow at 4 p.m. live on YouTube. We'll be answering a load more of your questions and dealing with some burning wrestling issues too. But this has been the Wednesday Night War preview. My thanks to the Dadley Boys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.